The sun was rising over Dubai's tall glass buildings, and the streets were already busy with expensive cars and people in elegant suits. Inside one of those shining towers stood Karim Al Fahad's company, a place where decisions worth millions were made every single day. Karim was a powerful businessman, known everywhere for his intelligence and success. But he was also known for something else, his pride. He spoke sharply, expected perfection, and didn't like being questioned. To his employees, he was both respected and feared. That morning was especially important. Karim had a big meeting scheduled with international investors who were flying in to discuss a deal that could make his company even richer. Everything had to be perfect, from the presentation slides to the bottled water on the table. The staff rushed around to make sure nothing went wrong. In his large mansion across town, Karim's maid, Maria, was also rushing. She had been working for him for months and knew exactly how demanding he was. Maria was kind, hardworking, and quiet. She always made sure the house looked spotless and that Karim's clothes were pressed perfectly. But today she had a problem. Her babysitter had fallen sick at the last minute, and she had no one to look after her 16-year-old daughter, Lena. Maria looked at Lena and said softly, "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry, but I'll have to take you with me to Mr. Karim's office today. Please, just sit quietly. Okay?" Lena nodded. She was used to her mother's long working hours. Even though their life wasn't easy, she never complained. She loved her mother deeply and respected her strength. They both took the bus to the city center. As they entered the tall building where Karim's office was, Lena couldn't help but look around in wonder. The marble floors, the shiny glass walls, the smell of fresh coffee. It was a completely different world from the small apartment she lived in. Maria led her daughter to the lobby and whispered, "Please stay here, my love. I'll be upstairs helping Mr. Karim. Just read something or use my old phone. Okay?" Lena smiled. "Don't worry, Mama. I'll be fine." She sat on one of the chairs in the corner, near the large glass window. The sunlight fell gently on her face as she took out an old, worn-out English novel from her school bag. It was a book she had borrowed from the library, the kind of story she loved because it made her forget about the real world for a little while. As she read, people in fancy suits walked by without even noticing her. They were too busy, too focused on their own importance. But Lena didn't mind. She had learned to stay invisible. It was something life had taught her early on. Meanwhile, upstairs, Karim was already impatient. His translator hadn't arrived yet, and the meeting was supposed to start in just a few minutes. He tapped his pen against the table and muttered to his assistant, "How can someone be late for such an important meeting?" The assistant nervously apologized and said she was trying to reach the translator. Karim checked his watch and sighed. "These foreigners expect everything to run smoothly, and now we look unprepared." His frustration was growing. For him, being in control was everything, and this small delay was enough to ruin his mood. Downstairs, Lena continued to read quietly. Every once in a while, she looked up to see people entering and leaving the elevators, speaking in English, Arabic, and even French. She listened carefully, trying to catch words she knew. Lena loved languages. She had learned English by watching old movies with subtitles and by practicing words she heard from tourists near her school. Maria came down for a moment, looking worried. "The translator didn't come," she whispered to Lena. "Mr. Karim is angry today. I hope the meeting goes well." Lena smiled softly. "It will, Mama. Don't worry." Soon, Maria was called back upstairs. The meeting room filled with investors, men and women in sharp suits who spoke with confidence. Karim greeted them politely, trying to hide his frustration. Everyone sat down, papers were opened, and the discussion began. But without a translator, things were getting difficult. Some parts of the conversation were misunderstood, and Karim's patience was wearing thin. The investors exchanged awkward looks as the assistant struggled to explain certain phrases. Karim leaned back in his chair, his eyes full of annoyance. He didn't like feeling helpless. For a man used to control, losing even a little power made him uncomfortable. He glanced around the room and saw Maria quietly standing in the corner, ready to serve coffee if needed. For a brief second, his eyes fell on her, and then, without realizing, on the girl he had seen earlier in the lobby. He remembered the maid mentioning her daughter. "She's here today," she had said nervously that morning. Karim didn't care then, he was too focused on his meeting. But soon, that ordinary girl sitting quietly in his office lobby would change everything he thought he knew about people, talent, and respect. As the meeting went on, the atmosphere grew tense. Karim's voice was sharp, the investors looked uneasy, and Maria stood silently, hoping the day would end without disaster. She didn't know that her daughter, sitting just a few steps away, was about to do something no one would ever forget. That morning, the city outside kept moving. Cars honking, sunlight glinting off skyscrapers. But inside that office, a small story was quietly unfolding. A story that would soon humble a billionaire and prove that wisdom and talent can come from the most unexpected places. The meeting room was large and bright, with long glass windows that showed the city skyline. Karim Al-Fahad sat at the head of the table, wearing a dark gray suit and an expression that showed both pride and impatience. Around him were the investors, a group of men and women from different countries. They had come to sign a big deal that could take Karim's company to another level. Everyone expected the meeting to run smoothly, but things were not going well. The translator still hadn't arrived. The assistant, a young man in his 20s, stood nervously near the door, holding a tablet and whispering into his phone. "Sir, I'm still trying to contact her," he said quietly. "She said she's on the way." Karim frowned. "On the way? We started 30 minutes ago," he said in a cold tone. He looked at the investors and forced a smile. "My apologies, everyone. It seems our translator is running late, but we'll continue." He began to speak in English, trying his best to sound fluent. His English was good, but his accent was heavy, and sometimes he struggled to find the right words. The investors listened politely, but it was clear that some of them couldn't fully understand his points. Whenever they asked questions, Karim had to pause and think, searching for translations in his head. The air in the room started to feel uncomfortable. One of the investors, a woman from London, said gently, "Maybe we should wait for the translator to arrive, Mr. Karim. We don't want any confusion." Karim's jaw tightened. He didn't like being told what to do, especially not in his own office. "No need," he said firmly. "I understand English very well." But inside, his frustration was building. He hated delays. He hated anything that made him look unprepared. Maria stood quietly in the corner of the room, serving tea and coffee. She watched the tension rise, her hands shaking slightly as she poured a cup. She hoped Karim wouldn't take out his anger on her staff. She had seen him lose his temper before, and it was never pleasant. Suddenly, one of the investors tried to explain a complicated legal term that Karim didn't fully grasp. He leaned toward his assistant and whispered in Arabic, "What is this nonsense she's saying? Can't they speak clearly?" The assistant didn't answer, afraid of making things worse. Karim sighed loudly. Then, as he looked around the room, his eyes landed on Maria. He noticed how nervous she looked and remembered that she had brought her daughter along that day. His irritation mixed with arrogance, and a cruel thought came to his mind. He smirked and said in Arabic, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe the maid's daughter can translate better than our professionals." The words hung in the air like a slap. Some of the Arabic-speaking staff looked down immediately, pretending not to hear. The investors didn't understand the language, but they sensed from the tone that something was off. Maria froze. Her heart sank, and her cheeks turned pale. She looked at the floor, ashamed, though she hadn't done anything wrong. Karim laughed softly, clearly amused by his own joke. "Don't take it seriously," he said in English to the investors. "Just a little humor." But the way he said it didn't sound kind. It sounded sharp, like a man who enjoyed reminding others of their place. Maria wished she could disappear. She wanted to say something, to defend her daughter, but her job was too important. She needed the money to pay rent, to buy food, to keep Lena in school. So she said nothing. She simply nodded and continued serving coffee, her hands trembling slightly. Downstairs, Lena was still sitting in the lobby, reading her book, unaware that her name had just been mentioned upstairs. She had no idea that a few careless words were about to change her life forever. Back in the meeting room, Kareem's mood didn't improve. The investors were becoming impatient, and his assistant kept checking his phone nervously. Kareem leaned back in his chair, his gold watch glinting under the lights. He muttered to himself in Arabic again. People want millions but can't even show up on time. This is what happens when you rely on others. Maria heard him and pressed her lips together, holding back her tears. She wasn't angry. She was hurt. She had always respected him. She worked hard every day to make his life easier. But in that moment, his words reminded her of how small she was in his world. Then Kareem chuckled again and said, half to himself and half to the room, maybe I should ask the maid's daughter to translate. Who knows? Maybe she's smarter than the rest of them. This time, even the assistant looked shocked. Sir, he began softly, but Kareem waved his hand. Relax. It's just a joke. The investor smiled politely, still unaware of the full meaning behind his words. But for Maria, the damage was done. Every second she stood there felt heavier. She kept thinking, why did he have to say that? She wanted to check on Lena to make sure her daughter was okay. In her heart, she knew Lena was special, bright, curious, and full of potential. But in this world, people like Kareem never saw that. They only saw a maid's child. As the meeting continued, Kareem's laughter echoed again, this time louder and more forced. He was trying to cover his irritation with arrogance. The investors joined in with polite smiles, but the warmth in the room was gone. Maria excused herself quietly, pretending to fetch more coffee. Her eyes were moist as she stepped into the hallway. She looked toward the lobby and saw Lena sitting peacefully, still reading her book. For a moment, Maria's sadness faded, replaced by pride. Her daughter wasn't just smart. She was extraordinary. She whispered under her breath. If only they knew who you really are, my Lena. But soon, Kareem's voice called from the room again. Maria, bring me some water, please. She wiped her eyes quickly and hurried back, trying to hide the pain behind her smile. What she didn't know was that fate was quietly preparing a moment. A small, simple test that would turn her humiliation into triumph. And the same girl who sat quietly in the lobby would soon walk into that very room and leave the mighty billionaire completely speechless. The meeting room was filled with the low murmur of voices and the sound of papers rustling. Kareem Al-Fahad was losing his patience. The translator still hadn't arrived, and the discussion with the foreign investors was going nowhere. The more he tried to control the situation, the more his frustration grew. His pride couldn't accept that something as simple as communication was ruining an important deal. Maria stood quietly near the corner of the room, watching him from behind the serving table. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured water into a glass. She could tell that Kareem was about to lose his temper again. He was known for being sharp-tongued, and when he was angry, his words could cut like a knife. Then, as if mocking his own situation, Kareem leaned back in his chair and said in Arabic, maybe the maid's daughter can translate for us since our professionals can't even show up. Some people in the room chuckled awkwardly, unsure how to react. Maria froze. Her heart dropped, and she wanted to disappear. She lowered her eyes, not daring to respond. The investors didn't understand Arabic, but they could feel the arrogance in his tone. Kareem noticed Maria's uncomfortable expression. Perhaps a small part of him realized he'd gone too far, but his pride wouldn't let him stop. Instead, he smiled and said in English, actually, let's make this interesting. His voice carried across the room. Bring your daughter in here. Maria's eyes widened in shock. Sir, please, she whispered nervously. She's just a child. Kareem ignored her. He stood up, straightened his suit jacket, and said with a smirk, if your daughter can translate one sentence correctly, I'll give her my job. Laughter broke out in the room. The investors didn't understand the full situation, but they laughed politely, assuming he was joking. The staff members exchanged uneasy looks, unsure if this was serious or just another display of their boss's arrogance. Maria's hands shook. She didn't want to bring Lena into this. Her daughter was innocent, She had nothing to do with Kareem's pride or his bad mood. But refusing him was impossible. He was her employer and saying no could cost her job. With a trembling voice, she said, "Yes, sir. I'll call her." She walked quickly toward the door, her heart pounding. Downstairs in the lobby, Lena was still sitting with her book. When she saw her mother's worried face, she stood up immediately. "Mama? What's wrong?" Maria took her daughter's hand. "Lena, listen to me. Mr. Kareem wants to see you. Please be respectful and don't be afraid. Okay?" Lena was confused but nodded. "Okay, Mama." They walked together to the elevator. Maria's mind was racing. Why is this happening? She thought. Why would he embarrass us like this? She wanted to protect her daughter, but it was too late to turn back. When they entered the meeting room, all eyes turned toward them. The men and women in suits looked curious. Kareem stood near the head of the table, arms crossed, a playful grin on his face. "So," he said, looking at Lena, "this is your daughter?" Maria nodded nervously. "Yes, sir." Lena looked up at the tall man before her. She didn't feel fear exactly, more confusion. Why was everyone staring? Why did her mother look so scared? Kareem spoke again, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Tell me, little one, do you understand Arabic?" Lena hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "A little, sir." Kareem chuckled. "A little? That's good enough for me. Let's test it." He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but challenging. "Translate what I say. If you get it right, the company is yours. If not, you'll learn that big people do big jobs for a reason." Maria wanted to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She couldn't stop this anymore. Kareem then said a long Arabic proverb, a complex sentence filled with words even some adults found hard to explain. The investors looked confused, not understanding a single word. Everyone waited. The room grew quiet, so quiet that the sound of the air conditioner could be heard. Lena listened carefully. Her eyes focused, and her lips moved slightly as she repeated the words in her mind. She had heard that proverb before, in one of her mother's old stories. Maria used to tell her little sayings from her time working in different homes, many of them in Arabic. Lena had always loved languages. She listened to them the way some people listen to music, carefully, patiently, until the meanings made sense. Kareem crossed his arms, sure that the girl would stutter or stay silent. But then Lena spoke. Her voice was calm, clear, and confident. "It means," she said in perfect English, "that true wisdom is not about having power, but about knowing when to use it." The entire room went silent. The investors blinked, surprised by her fluency. Even those who didn't understand Arabic could sense that her translation was flawless. Maria stood frozen, her hands over her mouth, tears already forming in her eyes. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Kareem's smile disappeared. His expression changed from amusement to disbelief. He stared at Lena as if she had just performed magic. How did you know that?" he asked softly. Lena shrugged slightly, still respectful. "My mother tells me stories in Arabic sometimes. I like learning new words." Her simple answer hit Kareem harder than any insult could. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. The investors clapped quietly, impressed not just by the girl but by her courage. Maria was speechless. She wanted to hug her daughter but stood still, not wanting to embarrass her. Kareem cleared his throat and forced a smile. "Well, it seems I underestimated you," he said, trying to hide his embarrassment. "You did well." But inside he felt something deeper, a strange mix of respect and guilt. For the first time, he saw not just a maid's daughter, but a young girl with intelligence, grace, and confidence beyond her years. As Maria and Lena left the room, Kareem watched them go silently. The laughter had stopped. The arrogance was gone. He didn't realize it yet, but that small challenge had just changed the way he saw the world and himself. And outside, as the elevator doors closed, Maria finally whispered to her daughter, "You were amazing, my love." Lena smiled shyly. "I just told the truth, Mama." Maria hugged her tightly. "Yes," she said softly. And sometimes the truth is the most powerful thing in the world. Upstairs, Kareem sat down again, still stunned. He had meant it as a joke, a moment to humiliate, but the joke had turned into a lesson. For the first time in a long while, he felt something new, humility. And that was just the beginning. For a few long seconds, the room stayed completely silent. No one moved. The air felt heavy, like everyone had forgotten to breathe. Kareem Al-Fahad, the billionaire who commanded hundreds of employees and controlled entire companies, stood frozen in disbelief. He had expected laughter, maybe a few giggles at the maid's daughter trying and failing to understand his words. But what he got instead was something he couldn't process: perfection. Lena, the 16-year-old girl with her mother's old phone and a quiet smile, had just translated one of the most difficult Arabic proverbs into flawless English. And not only did she get the words right, she understood the meaning. She had explained it better than most adults could. Kareem blinked, trying to act as if it was nothing. "Well, that was unexpected," he said with a half-smile, his voice slightly shaky. The investors sitting around the table looked impressed. They didn't know exactly what had happened, but from the expressions on Kareem's face and Maria's tears, they knew they had just witnessed something remarkable. One of the foreign investors leaned forward and asked, "That was perfect English. Did she really translate that herself?" Kareem nodded slowly. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "She did." Maria stood by the door, unable to hide her emotions. Her eyes glistened with tears, and she pressed her hands together, whispering softly, "Thank you, God." For so long she had worried about her daughter's future, about money, school fees, and survival. But in that moment, she realized that her daughter had something no one could take away: intelligence, confidence, and grace. Lena looked around the room shyly. "Did I say it right?" she asked innocently. One of the investors smiled warmly. "You said it perfectly," he said. "Better than most professionals I've met." The compliment made Lena blush. She glanced at her mother, who smiled back proudly, though her eyes were still wet. Kareem cleared his throat and adjusted his tie, trying to regain control of the room. He didn't like losing face, especially in front of his investors. "Well," he said, pretending to laugh, "it seems I might be out of a job soon." The others laughed politely, but it was clear that his joke didn't carry the same arrogance as before. There was a small hint of humility in his tone, something rare for a man like him. Still, Kareem couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. How could a maid's daughter speak such perfect English and Arabic? Where did she learn? He had always believed that education and intelligence belonged only to those who could afford them. But here stood a girl from a poor family who had just shattered that belief with a single sentence. He looked at Lena again. She stood tall, not proud or boastful, but calm, confident in her quiet way. There was something about her eyes, the way they showed both innocence and wisdom. Kareem's assistant, who had been standing silently near the wall, whispered, "Sir, that was incredible." Kareem didn't respond. He was too deep in thought. His pride was stung, but his mind was awakening to something new. He had mocked a child, and that child had just proven herself smarter than most of his own employees. The investors began whispering among themselves. One of them, a tall man from the UK, said, "You know, this girl could have a future in translation or diplomacy. She's gifted." Maria's face lit up with quiet hope. No one had ever said that about her daughter before, at least not someone important. Kareem looked at Maria, who quickly lowered her gaze, unsure of how he would react. But for once, there was no anger in his eyes. There was only curiosity. "Maria," he said slowly, "where did your daughter learn to speak like that?" Maria hesitated. "Sir, she learns on her own. From books, from the internet, from the people she hears when I work. She loves languages." Lena nodded softly. "Mama teaches me words she hears from her employers too. Sometimes I write them down and look up their meanings later." The investors smiled. One of them even said, "That's how real passion starts." Kareem leaned back in his chair and sighed, still staring at the girl who had just embarrassed him. but in the most graceful way possible. "You have a gift, young lady," he said quietly. "Don't waste it." Lena smiled, unsure what to say. "Thank you, sir." He gave a small nod and gestured for them to leave. "That will be all for now." As Maria and Lena turned to go, the room erupted in soft murmurs. The investors were clearly impressed, and a few even clapped lightly. Maria held her daughter's hand tightly as they walked out. The elevator doors closed, and Maria finally let her tears fall freely. "You did it, my love," she whispered. "You showed them who you are." Lena hugged her mother and said, "I wasn't trying to show off, Mama. I just wanted to help." Maria smiled through her tears. Sometimes, helping is all it takes to change everything. Meanwhile, back in the meeting room, Kareem stayed quiet for a long time. He barely heard what the investors were saying. His mind kept replaying the moment when Lena spoke. Her confidence, her fluency, her understanding. It humbled him. For years, he had believed that people like Maria and her daughter were destined to serve, not lead. But now he saw how wrong he was. He looked at the spot where Lena had stood and thought, that girl didn't just translate my words. She translated my ignorance into truth. The meeting ended soon after, but Kareem didn't leave immediately. He walked to the window and stared out at the city, at the same streets Maria probably walked every morning to get to work. For the first time in a long while, he felt something different, a mix of shame and admiration. He realized that he had laughed at the wrong person, and that the wisdom he had mocked had been standing right in front of him, wearing a simple dress and holding a borrowed book. That night, as the sun set behind the glittering towers of Dubai, Kareem couldn't stop thinking about the girl who had left him speechless. He didn't know it yet, but her voice would echo in his memory for years to come. The voice of truth spoken from a place he never thought to look. And for the first time, the proud billionaire finally understood what humility felt like. The room stayed silent for a few moments after Lena and her mother left. The sound of the door closing seemed to echo in everyone's ears. The investors were still whispering to one another, amazed at what they had just seen. Kareem sat still, his hands resting on the table, staring blankly at the door. For a man who was used to having all the answers, he suddenly didn't know what to think. He had just been outsmarted by a teenage girl, not a business rival, not a professor, not a diplomat, but the daughter of his maid. The same girl he had mocked just minutes earlier. The same girl he thought wasn't even worth a glance. His assistant broke the silence softly. "Sir, should we continue the meeting?" Kareem blinked, as if waking from a dream. Yes, let's continue," he said quickly, trying to sound calm. But inside he was shaken. His words earlier replayed in his mind. Maybe the maid's daughter can translate better than our team. And she had done exactly that. The investors, trying to be polite, smiled and went back to discussing business. But Kareem's attention was no longer on the charts or the numbers in front of him. His thoughts were still stuck on that moment. The calm voice of that young girl speaking with confidence, her eyes steady, her meaning clear. He realized that it wasn't just her words that had surprised him. It was her composure. Most adults he knew would have crumbled under pressure, especially in front of a powerful man like him. But she hadn't flinched. She had looked him in the eye, spoken with respect, and left him speechless. The meeting ended shortly after, but Kareem didn't move. As the investors left the room, they smiled and complimented him on having such talented staff. He forced a smile in return, but deep down, he felt embarrassed. He wasn't the one who impressed them. She was. When everyone was gone, the office became quiet again. Kareem loosened his tie and sat back in his chair, staring at the city skyline outside the window. The view of Dubai had always filled him with pride. Tall towers, shining lights, and symbols of power. But now he felt something different. The city looked the same, yet he felt smaller than ever. He thought about Maria and her daughter, how they probably lived in a small apartment somewhere on the outskirts of the city. He had never cared about his workers' lives outside his home. To him, they were just people who kept things running, cleaners, drivers, servants. But now he wondered, how many stories had he ignored? How many hidden talents had he stepped over? Downstairs, Maria and Lena were leaving the building. Maria's heart was still racing. She couldn't believe what had happened. As they walked through the lobby, people were still whispering. A few employees smiled at them. They had heard the story already. It was spreading fast. When they reached outside, Maria stopped and looked at her daughter. Her eyes were full of pride. "Lena," she said softly, "do you know what you just did?" Lena smiled shyly. "I just answered his question, Mama." Maria shook her head, laughing a little through her tears. "No, my love, you did more than that. You showed him something he'll never forget." Lena tilted her head, confused. "What do you mean?" Maria touched her daughter's face gently. "You showed him that respect and talent have nothing to do with money. You showed him that people like us are not invisible." Lena thought for a moment, then hugged her mother tightly. "I just didn't want him to laugh at you," she said quietly. Maria's eyes filled with tears again. "He can laugh all he wants, but not today," she whispered. "Today, my daughter made him listen." At that very same time, upstairs in his office, Kareem couldn't stop thinking about what the girl had said. He repeated her translation in his mind. True wisdom is not about having power, but about knowing when to use it. Those words hit him like a mirror. All his life, he had believed that wisdom came from wealth, education, and influence. He thought power was something that only belonged to people like him. But now, that single sentence from a maid's daughter had turned his thinking upside down. He realized that he had used his power to control, not to inspire. He had used his intelligence to show off, not to help others grow. The thought stung deeply. Later that evening, when the office was empty, Kareem stood by the window again. The sky was turning orange with sunset. He thought about his own childhood, how he used to be curious and humble before success had hardened him. Somewhere along the way, he had started believing that only rich people mattered. Now he saw how wrong he had been. For the first time in many years, Kareem wanted to apologize not just for his words, but for his attitude. He wanted to do something good, something that would make up for the way he had treated Maria and her daughter. But he didn't know how. He walked to his desk, sat down, and took out a piece of paper. On it, he wrote a few words slowly. "Never underestimate anyone." He placed it inside his drawer, like a reminder to himself, a silent promise that he would change. At home, Maria and Lena were sitting at their small dining table, eating dinner. It wasn't much, rice and lentils, but the air felt different that night. There was joy, pride, and peace in their tiny apartment. Maria kept smiling at her daughter. "Do you know something?" she said gently. "Today, when he laughed, I felt small. But when you spoke, I felt taller than any of those tall buildings." Lena giggled softly. "Mama, you're being dramatic." Maria laughed. "Maybe I am, but it's true." That night, when Lena went to bed, she didn't know that her words had already begun to change a powerful man's heart. And upstairs in his mansion, Kareem sat in silence, remembering her calm voice and the look in her eyes. He whispered to himself, "That girl. She taught me something no book ever could." The lesson was simple, yet powerful. Greatness doesn't wear a suit, and wisdom doesn't live only in palaces. Sometimes, it sits quietly in a maid's daughter, waiting for a chance to speak. The next morning, Kareem woke up earlier than usual. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl from the day before. Even after a full night's sleep, her calm, confident voice kept echoing in his mind. Every time he tried to think about work or his meetings, her words came back to him, clear, honest, and full of meaning. It was as if something inside him had been shaken awake. For years, Kareem had believed that success was built on money and power. He had worked hard, climbed higher than anyone else, and built an empire that people respected and feared. But now, after just one encounter with a maid's daughter, he began to feel that maybe he had misunderstood what true greatness meant. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was just rising over the skyline of Dubai, painting the tall towers gold. The city looked alive, but he felt strangely empty. He realized that all the things he had built, the cars, the mansion, the business, none of them could fill the quiet guilt that now sat in his heart. Kareem picked up his phone and called his assistant. "Can you find Maria for me?" he asked. The assistant hesitated. "Sir, Maria? Your maid?" "Yes," Kareem said softly. "And her daughter. I want them to come here. Today." The assistant was surprised but agreed. Within a few hours, Maria and Lena were on their way to the mansion. Maria was nervous. She kept adjusting her scarf and looking at her daughter. "Why do you think he wants to see us again?" she asked quietly. Lena shrugged. "Maybe he wants to say sorry," she said innocently. Maria sighed. "Men like him don't say sorry, Lena." When they arrived, the guards greeted them politely this time. No cold stares, no dismissive gestures. They were guided straight into the grand living room. Everything looked more welcoming than before. Kareem was already waiting for them, standing by the window. He turned around as they entered. Maria immediately bowed her head, but Kareem raised his hand gently. "Please, Maria, no need for that. Sit down." She hesitated, unsure of what was happening. Lena, though nervous, sat quietly beside her mother. Kareem took a deep breath before speaking. "I owe both of you an apology," he began. His voice was calm but full of emotion. "Yesterday, I said things that were rude and disrespectful. I spoke without thinking, and I treated you as if you were less than me. But your daughter," he looked at Lena with a faint smile. "Your daughter reminded me what true intelligence and dignity look like." Maria's eyes widened. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. A billionaire, her employer, was apologizing to her and her daughter. Kareem continued, "I realized that real worth doesn't come from money or status. It comes from character, from knowledge, and from kindness. Your daughter showed me all three." He walked over to his desk and picked up a small envelope. "Lena," he said softly, handing it to her. "This is for you." Lena opened it carefully. Inside was a letter and a card. She looked up at him with confusion. "What is this, sir?" Kareem smiled. "It's a scholarship. I spoke to the head of the international school this morning. You'll be studying there, full expenses covered. You deserve a chance to learn, to grow, and to become anything you want." Maria covered her mouth in shock. Tears filled her eyes. "Sir, this is too much," she whispered. Kareem shook his head. "It's not charity, Maria. It's respect. Your daughter earned this." Lena couldn't believe it. Her heart raced as she looked at her mother, who was still crying quietly. She had never dreamed of studying in such a school. Kareem walked over and sat in front of them. His voice softened even more. "You know, when I was young, I was poor too. My mother worked day and night just to feed us. But someone helped me once. A teacher saw something in me, potential, he called it. And that one act of kindness changed my entire life. Yesterday, when I saw Lena, I saw that same spark." He looked at the girl kindly. "Lena, promise me one thing. Use this opportunity well. One day, when you're in my place, remember to lift someone else too." Lena nodded slowly, her eyes shining. "I promise, sir," she said softly. Maria wiped her tears and whispered, "May God bless you, sir. You don't know what this means to us." Kareem smiled humbly. "Maybe I do," he replied. For the first time in years, Kareem felt something genuine, not pride, not power, but peace. It was a feeling he hadn't known since his youth. As they talked more, he found himself listening to Maria's stories about raising her daughter, about their struggles, about their small dreams. He realized how little he had ever truly seen the people who worked for him. When they finally stood to leave, Kareem walked them to the door himself. The household staff was stunned. No one had ever seen him do that. Before they left, Lena turned and said shyly, "Thank you, sir, for believing in me." Kareem nodded. "No, Lena, thank you for reminding me what really matters." As they left, the mansion felt brighter somehow. Kareem stood there for a long time watching them go. He thought about how different he felt now compared to just a day ago. It was as if the heavy weight he had been carrying, the arrogance, the pride, the emptiness, had lifted off his shoulders. That evening, he sat at his desk and opened the same drawer where he had written his note. He took it out and read it again. never underestimate anyone. Then he added one more line beneath it, because greatness often hides where you least expect it. He smiled, folded the paper carefully, and placed it back in the drawer. For the first time in years, Kareem didn't feel like a man who ruled over others. He felt like a man who finally understood life. And somewhere across town, in a small apartment, Maria held her daughter close and whispered, "You see, my child, kindness never goes unnoticed." Lena smiled in her sleep, dreaming not of palaces or riches, but of classrooms, books, and a brighter future. A future made possible by one act of humility, and a lesson learned too late by a billionaire who once laughed at the wrong person. Weeks passed after that unforgettable day, and life began to change for everyone involved. For Maria and Lena, every day now felt like a new beginning. Lena had started studying at the international school, the one Kareem had promised to send her to. The first day she walked into that massive building, she felt both excited and nervous. The classrooms were bright and filled with students from all over the world. They spoke different languages, wore expensive clothes, and carried themselves with confidence. At first, Lena felt like she didn't belong there. She wore simple clothes, carried a second-hand bag, and spoke softly, afraid to make mistakes. Some of the students whispered, wondering who she was. But when the teacher introduced her and mentioned that she had received a scholarship because of her intelligence, everyone turned to look at her differently. In her first week, Lena stayed quiet, listening carefully to everything the teacher said. But by the second week, she began to shine. Her quick understanding and strong memory impressed her teachers. She answered questions that others couldn't, and her essays were full of deep thought and creativity. Slowly, her classmates started to respect her, and even the ones who had ignored her began asking for her help. At home, Maria couldn't stop smiling. She had taken extra cleaning jobs, not because she needed to, but because she felt proud showing people that her daughter now studied in one of the best schools in the city. Whenever someone asked about Lena, her face lit up with joy. "My daughter is studying where the rich send their children," she would say with pride. Meanwhile, Kareem had also changed. The arrogant man who once looked down on others was no longer the same. He had started treating his staff with kindness and respect. The people who worked for him noticed the difference right away. He no longer shouted when things went wrong, and he often listened to their suggestions. The same employees who used to fear him now admired him. One day, Kareem called a meeting with his board members. When they gathered, they were surprised to see him standing in front of a new presentation. "Gentlemen," he began, "I've been thinking about something important. We've built buildings, businesses, and wealth. But what have we done for people?" The room went silent. No one had ever heard him talk like this before. Kareem continued, "I want to start a foundation, one that helps educate children who can't afford school. There are so many young minds out there, waiting for a chance, just like that girl who showed us all what true talent looks like." The board members nodded, impressed. One of them smiled and said, "That's a wonderful idea, sir. It will change lives." Kareem looked out the window and said softly, "It already changed mine." From that day, Kareem's company began funding scholarships for children from poor families. Every month, new names were added. Kids from different backgrounds, different dreams, all connected by one act of kindness that had started with a moment of shame and realization. Lena, unaware of all this, kept focusing on her studies. One day, her teacher gave the class a special assignment. Write about the person who changed your life. While other students wrote about celebrities, scientists, and famous leaders, Lena chose someone else. She wrote about her mother, a maid who worked tirelessly to give her a better future. She described how her mother's patience, strength, and dignity had taught her everything she needed to know about life. When the teacher read her essay, she was deeply moved. The next week, the school principal called Lena to his office. He smiled warmly and said, "Lena, your essay has been selected to represent our school in the National Young Writers Competition." Lena was shocked. "Me, sir?" "Yes," the principal said proudly. "Your story is powerful. It speaks of humility and love, something the world needs more of." Lena ran home that day, her heart bursting with excitement. When she told her mother, Maria hugged her tightly, tears rolling down her cheeks. "You see, my child? God blesses those who stay humble." A few days later, Kareem received a call from the school principal. "Sir," he said, "I thought you'd like to know that the girl you helped, Lena, has been selected for a national competition. Her story is touching hearts everywhere." Kareem smiled widely. "That's wonderful news," he said. "Please send me a copy of her essay." When the principal sent it over, Kareem sat down to read it carefully. By the time he reached the last paragraph, his eyes were wet. Lena hadn't mentioned his name at all. She hadn't written about the billionaire who gave her a scholarship. Instead, she wrote about her mother's strength and sacrifice. Kareem realized something deeper. He had changed because of Lena, but Lena was strong because of her mother. Her real hero was not him. It was Maria, the woman who had faced humiliation with grace and raised a daughter who spoke with wisdom. That night, Kareem couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Maria and how she must have struggled all those years. The next morning, he made a decision. He called Maria to his office. When she arrived, she looked nervous again, just like the first time. But Kareem smiled warmly. "Maria," he said, "I want to offer you a position here, not as a maid, but as the head of our new community center. You'll be helping families like yours, connecting them with scholarships and support." Maria was speechless. "Sir, me? I don't have the education for that." Kareem shook his head. "You have something more valuable. Experience, compassion, and strength. That's what we need." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." Kareem smiled. "I know you will." As Maria left the office that day, her heart felt lighter than ever before. From being a maid who was once mocked, she had become someone respected and trusted. Her daughter was thriving, her life was changing, and all of it began with one simple moment. When a girl refused to stay silent and showed the world that worth has nothing to do with status. And somewhere deep inside, Kareem felt truly proud. Not of his money, not of his buildings, but of the people he had finally learned to see. Months passed, and life began to bloom like a beautiful garden for both Maria and Lena. The once small and quiet apartment now echoed with laughter, books, and dreams. Every evening, Maria would sit by the window waiting for Lena to return from school, and as soon as she stepped inside, the house would fill with stories. Lena always had something new to share, about the lessons she learned, the friends she made, and the dreams she was building. Maria listened with tears of joy in her eyes. She could still hardly believe it. Her daughter, who once helped her clean other people's houses, now walked the halls of one of Dubai's most prestigious schools. Life had taken such a surprising turn. But Maria never let success change her heart. She remained humble, grateful, and full of prayers for the man who had given her daughter a chance. Kareem, on the other hand, had also changed in ways no one could have imagined. The man who once measured worth in money and titles now spent more time visiting schools, meeting students, and listening to their stories. He found happiness not in profits but in watching others grow. His new foundation had already helped hundreds of children from poor families continue their studies. He often said in his speeches, "True wealth is not what you keep, but what you give." One evening, Kareem was invited as a guest speaker at the same school Lena attended. It was the school's annual cultural night, and students were performing songs, dances, and speeches. Lena was also part of the event. She had been chosen to deliver a short speech about the power of kindness. When Kareem arrived, the principal greeted him warmly. The audience applauded as he took his seat in the front row. He didn't know Lena would be one of the speakers that night. The lights dimmed, and the event began. One by one, students came on stage, performing beautifully. Then it was time for Lena's speech. She walked to the microphone with calm confidence, dressed neatly in her school uniform. Kareem noticed her immediately, the same girl whose voice had once left him speechless. He leaned forward, listening carefully. Lena began, her voice clear and steady. "Kindness is something that doesn't cost money, but it can change lives. Sometimes, even a small act of kindness can open doors we never knew existed. I want to share a story," My story. The hall grew silent. Every eye was on her. Once, she continued, someone laughed at me because of where I came from. They thought that being poor meant I wasn't smart. But that moment became my strength. It taught me to never give up and to believe in myself. And because of one act of kindness from that same person, I now stand here today, speaking in front of all of you. Kareem's eyes widened as he realized she was talking about him. But she didn't mention his name. She spoke only of forgiveness, learning, and how people can change for the better. Her words were simple, yet they touched everyone deeply. She ended her speech by saying, sometimes life gives you pain not to break you, but to prepare you. The person who once made you cry can become the reason you smile again. Kindness can heal anything, even hearts filled with pride. The crowd stood up in applause. Kareem found himself clapping with tears in his eyes. He had listened to hundreds of speeches in his lifetime, but none had moved him like this one. It wasn't just the words, it was the truth behind them. After the event ended, Kareem waited near the stage. When Lena came down, he smiled and said, "You've grown into an incredible young lady, Lena." Lena smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir. You taught me something I'll never forget. Never underestimate anyone." Kareem chuckled softly. "And you taught me something even greater. Never stop learning, no matter how high you rise." Maria, who had been standing nearby, joined them. Her eyes were shining with pride. "Sir," she said warmly, "you changed our lives. I can never thank you enough." Kareem shook his head. "No, Maria. You and your daughter changed mine. I used to think I was powerful because I had money. But now I know real power is kindness." They all stood quietly for a moment, smiling at each other. It felt like life had come full circle. The arrogant billionaire, the humble maid, and the brave daughter who had connected their worlds. A few weeks later, Kareem invited Maria and Lena to the opening of his new education center. A large building with bright walls, computers, and classrooms for underprivileged children. The banner above the gate read, "The Lena Foundation for Future Leaders." When Maria saw her daughter's name written in bold letters, she gasped, covering her mouth in disbelief. Lena turned to Kareem with wide eyes. "Sir, you named it after me?" Kareem smiled gently. "You inspired it. This foundation will remind everyone that one person, no matter how small or unseen, can make a big difference." Tears filled Maria's eyes as she whispered, "God bless you, sir." As they walked through the building, children ran around laughing and learning. Kareem watched them with a soft smile. "You know," he said quietly, "years ago, I thought I was teaching others how to be successful. But now I realize, success taught me nothing. People like you did." Lena looked around at the children, their happy faces glowing in the sunlight, and said softly, "Then I want to teach too. Not with money, but with kindness." Kareem nodded proudly. "That's how the world truly changes, Lena." From that day on, Maria worked as the coordinator of the foundation, helping families find hope, while Lena continued her studies with passion. Years later, she became a translator, traveling the world, speaking different languages, and sharing her story on international stages. And every time she told it, she always ended with one simple line, the same words that once started it all. "Translate this," he had laughed. But in the end, it was she who translated the meaning of life. Not with words, but with kindness, courage, and the power to change hearts. It wasn't just a story about a billionaire and a maid's daughter anymore. It became a story about humanity, about how one act of respect can heal years of arrogance, and how the smallest voices can echo louder than the proudest ones when they speak the truth.